Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's been an absolutely lovely spring day here in Pretoria, and I hope wherever you find yourself that you are healthy and in good spirit. This afternoon, we will be discussing the topic of forensic audits, what the law says, and what the rights of you, the practitioner, and the fund areas. We had a tremendous registration response. And I think if I can use the words, all the seats are sold out or allocated actually. Unfortunately, we can only accommodate around 500 people. So if one of your colleagues or one of your friends didn't register or they couldn't make it this afternoon, please just tell them not to worry. We will make this recording available on YouTube and some of the other media platforms. And I will post that YouTube link for you in just a second. I quickly had a look at our register, and we have 20 different disciplines joining us this afternoon. And this literally ranges from dietitians, psychologists, biokineticists, chiropractors, there's speech therapists and audiologists, social workers, OTs, OPs, and the list goes on. Now, you might remember, and while we just give everyone a little bit of time to settle in, that at the end of 2020, which literally now feels like ages ago, Profnet partnered with Shackleton Risk Management, Genoa Underwriting Managers, and Sapphire. And between the three of them, they created a range of new medical professional indemnity policies. And if you didn't know, you can actually include at a minimal monthly amount forensic audit coverers as well, which is it's a great additional benefit. But to talk more about the forensic audits, I've got two people joining us here today. They are both consultants with Genoa. First of all, a very familiar face to this event is Dr. Brad Byra, a chiropractor for many years, author of many a medical journal. And if that wasn't enough, Brad, you're also a medical legal expert. So very welcome and thank you for joining us again.
Hey, Lani, so nice to be here. I'm glad that you didn't set the bar too high. You know, there's no pressure now to perform a little bit, but it's very nice to talk about this topic, especially with Karen. And I'm going to hand back to you to introduce her, and then we'll go into the riveting delights of forensic audits.
Excellent. And joining us for the first time, but I'm absolutely sure it won't be the last time, is Karen Gibbs. Karen, a qualified physiotherapist for just over 21 years now, if I'm not mistaken. She's also been on the National Executive Committee of the Physiotherapy Society of South Africa for the last year. And Karen has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to forensic audits, and she's been very actively involved in this area for also over a year now. So Karen, welcome to you as well.
Thank you, Lani. I will try not to come across as nervous as I feel, but yes.
You'll be fine. I think everyone knows me by now. My name is Lani Ace, and I'm a product manager with the SpaceNet Global Group. If I may just take a minute, just before we start today, let me set the scene. This isn't a society or an association-specific discussion. Neither is it a discipline or a funder-specific discussion. What this afternoon is about is to clarify what the law says, what you as a healthcare provider's rights are when you receive an audit letter from a funder. But I'm sure both Karen and Brad will tell you the first thing that you're going to do is to panic a little bit. And that's also quite all right. And we'll discuss that at length. But what is important is what you need to do after you receive a letter like that. But I want to start by touching on the law, and I'm definitely not the expert here. So I'm going to turn to Brad with your medical legal background. Maybe you can just take us through the legislation. Let's touch on Section 59. I know there's a Rule 6 as well of the Medical Schemes Act. So maybe Brad, over to you, and let's get the ball on the roll.
Sure. Thanks, Lani. You know, for those of you that don't know me, I'm in Cape Town, and probably now the easiest thing to do is go for a walk on the mountain or swim in the sea, because the thing about law is it's about clear as mud. Now, the reason that I like law is it's written in long sentences with lots of commas, but very few full stops. So what I want to do is just create the context of what can and can't we do, because everything that we do has to be lawful, which means it has to fall within one of the laws that govern us. And we do a separate talk about this. And when I made a list of all the laws that govern us as healthcare professionals, There is a whole lot. There's the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which starts at the top. And then there's the National Health Act. And then there's the Health Professions or Allied Health Professions Act. And that also enables there to be a Health Professions Council with its regulations and an Allied Health Professions Council with its regulations. So we have to abide by all of that. But in addition to that, we've got the Consumer Protection Act. And then we have the Medical Schemes Act. And then through the Medical Schemes Act, the Council for Medical Schemes and all of its rules and regulations. So that's just some of the bundle. Now, I say that because we as practitioners, when we register, part of our registration commitment is that we're going to abide by all of the rules that affect us as practitioners in the climate of where we work, which includes how we bill and what we bill. So I remember way back when, before computers were like they are now, we had no billing codes, and then we had ICD-8. And ICD-8 was like this big deal of what was going to come in. And I went across and I studied coding and health systems in San Francisco at the time. They were talking about this thing called modified ICDs and then SNOMED codes, where you'd have a procedure code and a diagnosis code and a treatment code. And sometimes those codes could run deep. And for many of you who won't know this, the first time Dion and I spoke in the same room in our contemporary time was at the F&B building in Cape Town on the complexities of coding. And it's an immensely detailed thing. But the reason it's important is because you have a contract with the funder to code appropriately. And you got into that contract with the funder when you signed the agreement that said that you would accept money from the funder. So legally binding contracts have to have consensus. And that consensus needs three things to it. The first thing it needs is it needs you to know what your responsibilities are and the other person to know theirs, and that you both agree to your duties and obligations. So you're contractually bound to code appropriately. Now there's that big word, appropriately, because what it means to code appropriately is very different depending on who you ask. And that's where a lot of this difficulty comes from. But then we have this section in the Medical Schemes Act called Section 59. And for those of you that can't sleep, you can have a look at Section 59, specifically Section 59.2 and 59.3. And you notice I know these because I don't sleep and that's what I read. But Section 59.2 says that a medical scheme, and I'm paraphrasing here, shall in the case where an account has been rendered subject to the provisions of the Act, blah, 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 pay. But then it says that any amount which has been paid bona fide or in good standing, in accordance with the Act, they can claim back if there was theft or fraud or negligence or any misconduct that comes to the notice of the medical scheme. So if you've billed in a manner that they would regard as negligent, they can claim that money back from you in terms of sections 59.3, and I'll tell you what those are. But what does negligence mean? It's the failure to use reasonable care. Now, many of you, when we've spoken about medical legal issues, we spoke about reasonable. So what would the reasonable person do? And it's also doing something that the reasonably prudent person would not do. So when it comes to issues of billing, not all the issues are that you're fraudulent. And not all the issues are that you're wasteful. Not all of the issues are that you're abusing the system. But some of the issues are that you've billed in a manner that is negligent. In other words, not in accordance with what is considered by them to be reasonable. So that's the framework. And off the back of that framework, there's three tests when a scheme wants to claw back money. And then I'm going to hand over to Karen who will go through this. The first test is, can we do this lawfully? The second test is it done in a way that's procedurally fair? And the third test is there reasonableness to the action? So there's got to be lawfulness, procedural fairness, and reasonableness in terms of two things. In terms of there being a clawback, either you as the provider or your member, your patient, must have been paid a benefit to which they weren't entitled. Or you or the member must have engaged either in fraud or theft or professional misconduct or negligence. that caused a loss to the scheme. So you don't have to be a willfully fraudulent person. But if you've done coding in a manner that's inconsistent with the practice guidelines of your professional body, or you have treated outside of what is considered to be a reasonable scope of care. And just before I came onto this call, I took a call where I spoke to an auditor from PwC who said, oh yeah, I've been doing these kind of forensic audits for years, they say. They say, in fact, the first one we found was we saw this gynecologist, and once a month, this gynecologist was seeing this patient, but the patient was male. So there are those of you who maybe sail a bit close to the wind, but that's the context in terms of the law as to how the schemes would go about clawing back monies or benefits that have paid to you that they believe haven't naturally occurred to you in terms of the law.
Good.
And Lonnie, you told me I must stop talking, so I'm stopping here.
Thanks, Brad. Just for everyone attending, I am literally pasting the reference to the relevant section that Brad was speaking about now in the chat functionality. And also, please feel free to use the chat functionality to post some of your questions. All three guest speakers here and myself, sorry, two guest speakers and myself included, will try and keep an eye on it and try and answer some of those questions as the afternoon unfolds. But Karen, your thoughts? I mean, you're obviously very close to this as well.
Yeah, I think Brad touched on some very important points there. I think anybody that is going through an audit or is contacted by a funder really needs to avail themselves of this information, and they need to go and read the relevant sections. So I think what is important, there seems to be also the myth out there that the funders are doing this illegally. What is also important to note is that Section 59 of the Medical Schemes Act allows the funder to do this. The funder is not doing it illegally. They have the right to launch an audit or to double check payments that they have made. And there's so firstly, they have that specific clause gives them the right to do that. And then there's something called Regulation 6. So you've got the Medical Schemes Act, and then you've got regulations on the Medical Schemes Act. And there's a Regulation 6 there. I think Lani will also post a link to that. But there's now a lot of confusion happening between this clause of Section 59 and this Regulation 6, because Regulation 6 says effectively that a funder has 30 days to advise you of any problems they have with a claim that you have submitted or that the patient has submitted. And in that 30 days, they should advise you. You can then review the claim, correct if it's required, and resubmit, okay? So what we're seeing with these forensic audits is when the funder does come to you, they very often come questioning claims spanning almost 3 years. So it can be quite a long period of time that they are questioning the billing from. And now a lot of the medical practitioners are getting themselves on an awful tiz because they are confusing Section 59 with Regulation 6 and say the funder only had 30 days to question. They cannot now come 3 years later and question these claims. They had 30 days. Now, there is a lot of controversy around this, and it really does depend who you speak to on the day about what the prevailing opinion on this is. So the funder has a very specific opinion on this. The funders feel that Regulation 6 pertains to monies not yet paid out. Once they have actually paid out money, Regulation 6 falls away, and we're moving into Section 59 territory. So, and I think a lot of the members that I've assisted with the audits are struggling with that concept because they say, yeah, but I mean, that clause says that they can't come after me for claims older than 30 days. Yes, they can. They can. I think a part of the quagmire we find ourselves in at the moment with this regulation, or with this legislation is probably a better word, is the fact that it is being interpreted differently by different people, but all legal. So the funders' legal departments have a different view, and then the different societies' legal departments have a different view. But this has not been tested as such in court so that we can have a definitive answer as to whose interpretation is actually correct. And that actually makes it quite difficult for the practitioner to understand it, because if even the legal aspect or the legal people can't agree, then us as practitioners are pretty lost in that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a true story. And if I was to build on that to give you what could be a good guidance note as to how this process is happening, there was an investigation done on this called the Section 59 investigation. And it was completed finally in January. And it had other issues to it. But when we talk about the clawback issue, and I use the term loosely, but that's what it is. It's a clawback of monies paid to you to the impoverishment of the scheme. Now, remember, in your head, you've got to separate out the scheme, that's a non-profit organization for the benefit of its members, and the scheme administrator who does the actions in representing the interests of the scheme. They're always different things. But if you looked at the summary of the Section 29 investigation, it was published at the end of March. And I suppose one of the reasons I like law so much is there's no right or wrong. It's just who argues better on the day. So Lonnie will roll her eyes because she knows I love to argue. But the arguing is important. And if you looked at sections 19.5 and 19.6 of that summary, they speak to they speak to a couple of things, and then I'm going to answer the question that's been raised on what is the position of the HPCSA in this. So the issues when it comes to understanding what you can or can't do is that those three requirements that we spoke of earlier, the lawfulness, procedural fairness, and reasonableness, require the scheme to always ensure that those two preconditions we spoke about have been met. Either that the benefit that's been paid they weren't entitled to, or that there was either fraud or theft or professional misconduct or negligence. But they have to do it in a way where they are able to justify the decision to claw back. They can't just claw back. They have to justify that they're clawing back. And they have to make sure that it doesn't include or cause either undue or disproportionate harm. So imagine if I said to you as a practitioner, I've decided that you owe me R1 million. Now you've got 30 days to pay. Or I'm not paying any of your future benefits until that rand has been paid back. Well, that creates an undue and disproportionate harm because proportionately it affects my way of living. So part of the mechanism that your funder has to use is they have to make sure that this doesn't cause undue or disproportionate harm. They have to be able to justify it in a reasonable way. Now, their focus of justification and your sense of justice on what they justify could be quite different. And Corin, I know, is going to talk about that as well. But also there's two more pieces that's really important. The first is that the provider has to be given an opportunity to meaningfully comment. And meaningfully comment is part of what has to be interpreted. Meaningful comment for a lot of people is, yes, I'm sorry, how much do I need to pay? But meaningful comment can also be, I fundamentally disagree with you. And again, I'm stealing Corin's lunch, so I'm going to stop. But before the decision for clawback is made, there is an obligation that they listen to your meaningful comments. Corin?
But before we get to that, Corin, from a funder's point of view, what grounds does a funder have to actually do an audit? What would trigger an audit?
Okay, yeah, and I think that follows on nicely from what Brad said. So this is quite important. A funder cannot just randomly target a practitioner for an audit. There has to be a reason, and the two reasons at the moment which are put forward is there has to be a complaint. So either a member of that scheme needs to have made a complaint to the funder, or, and most of these funders have the option of anonymous complaints being raised against a practitioner. So there must have been a concern raised directly against that practitioner. That's the first one. The second one is that the funders employ algorithms to monitor claims profiles across the different medical practitioners. Now, there's a lot that can be said about this. There has been investigations conducted about, we're talking about a computer program that identifies anomalies, but sometimes those anomalies can be very easily explained by a very simple explanation. If you might be, and I'm going to take say for example 2 physio practices. One physio practice might work in 20-minute slots, and another physio practice might work in a 60-minute slot. and the billing will be different. So the practice working in a 60-minute slot will have the time period to charge more codes because the intervention is proportionately larger. But if you just look at the numbers, it looks like one practice is charging 2 to 3 times what the other practice is charging. But there's a very good and simple explanation for it. So that's why the algorithms, as much as the funders do say that these algorithms, are reviewed regularly, there is a concern that these algorithms can, and I believe do often, throw out anomalies which are actually quite normal variants. And but those are the two. A funder really cannot come to you blindly. They have to have a reason, and they have to, and there is an obligation on them to explain to you why they have come to you. And it is your right to ask for them to inform you why they are coming to you with these questions.
Mm-hmm. Karen, I want to go on to another question there, but Brad, perhaps just quickly back to you. Do you want to answer Dion's question before we continue?
Yeah, so the question was, what is the role of the HPCSA or the AHPCSA in this? And their role is not to represent healthcare practitioners on issues of billing disputes with funders, because there's a variety of reasons for this. Their primary role is to set the cadence for the ethical conduct of you as the practitioner and protect the public from you, strangely enough. So, we think, well, the regulator is there to protect us. But think about what the term regulate means. They are there to ensure that we pay annually, that we comply with the ethical guidelines and standards, that we conform to the prerequisites and requirements that are made, and protect people who are not registered. So they protect us from people practicing in our chosen professions who are not registered. And they protect people who we treat from unscrupulous or inappropriate treatment from us. Now, if we were great people, as an example, if we were all great people, there'd be no list of disputes on the HPCSA or AHPCSA, but there's a long list on both. Not only that, if you go and you look at the published settlements, there are significant settlements, a lot for sexual misconduct, a lot for inappropriate care, a lot for overcharging and inappropriate behavior. So we are not a blameless profession. And I'm not saying that to criticize us. I'm saying that to recognize that the role of the regulator is to ensure that the balance of what we do and our professional conduct remains within the spheres of what we're supposed to do. The election of that, where it goes into the relationships with funding, then spills over into two things. It goes into the relationship with the Board of Healthcare funders and our PCNS numbers, what we can and can't bill for, and then it goes into the tariff of fees. Now, I see some of the comments are coming through. There are negotiated tariffs of fees that are done between associations and societies and funders, with the purpose of reaching a balance and removing obstacles. And part of that is an agreed upon set of diagnoses and procedures, like diagnosis treatment pairs and diagnosis related groups. What we have to make sure as practitioners is that we understand what our society has negotiated, because sometimes what we do and what our society says are not always the same thing. And sometimes we are independent practitioners, but we're not a member of the society, so we're not always aware of what the society is doing. Now, there's something that you've heard me say before, but in the cold black letter of the law, ignorance is not a defense. So if you say, well, I didn't know what my society agreed with my funder in terms of a universal system of billing, coding, and diagnoses, you're not absolved from having to follow the rules that the society, as the mass representation, has done for you in your profession.
So at the end of the day, it is still your responsibility to know and to go and find out.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can pop in there, I cannot agree with Brad enough. So I have assisted quite a number of practitioners with these audits, and it is sad because I know we're not profession specific, but for example, I will say the physiotherapy coding system is particularly ambiguous and complex. We are at higher risk, I think, than some of the other professions of being identified of coding incorrectly. And I use the word coding incorrectly, very specifically. The Section 59 interim report to which Brad refers was very specific in that the funder uses the term fraud, waste, and abuse. That's the term that they use as the reasons for these clawbacks. But there is something just called erroneous billing, incorrect billing, errors made. And some of these are absolutely genuine errors. Okay, and the Section 59 report was also clear that the current descriptor of the reasons for these audits is not broad enough, because it needs to bring in the fact that you can actually code incorrectly. Okay, that doesn't make you a fraudster. That doesn't make you wasteful. It doesn't make you an abuser of the funder. And many of these audits, just if an audit is legit, it still doesn't mean that you're a fraudster. It could be that you're just a really bad biller. But then at the same time, now I come back to what Brad said, that does not absolve you. It makes us sympathetic to it. And we can understand why you are in the mess you are in. But at the same time, the responsibility remains yours to understand the coding and understand the billing. Now, I have had too many practitioners say to me, but I didn't know. And I go, yes, I'm really sympathetic to that, but that's not going to help. To say you didn't know is not going to get you out of an audit, especially, and I'm coming back to the reasonable principle that Brad said, has enough information been made available? Did you have access to that information in order to inform yourself? And if the answer to that is yes, then unfortunately, we come back to why ignorance will not be an excuse if one of these audits are launched against you.
So Karen, let's say an audit happened and you are contacted. As a healthcare provider, what can you expect? What happens? Is it a letter? Is it an email?
Yeah, it's normally an email with a letter attached. So it's both. I don't think we do snail mail really in South Africa anymore, but it's normally an email that's got a letter attached. So, and again, what's interesting, I've seen a great deal of these, and they can vary quite a lot. There's a lot of variance. So the last thing you actually should do as a practitioner, if you do get one of these, colloquially, we call them love letters. Okay, I'm not sure if that's the legal term, but we call them love letters. But when you get one of these, the worst thing you can do is phone up your buddy who you know has been audited to check if your letter agrees with his letter. Okay, because these letters can differ wildly. So some of them are friendlier than others. Some of them are really not friendly, but they can vary from a request for a meeting. It could be a request for you to provide the funder with your understanding of certain codes. It can be a request for clinical notes immediately. But most of the time, it's a letter from the funder informing you that they have conducted some sort of investigation into your practice. And sometimes they provide you with a reason in that first letter. Sometimes you've got to drag it out of them. And they require more information. And most of the time, you are invited to a meeting with the funder to discuss this. So I think the audits are such a topical thing at the moment that when you get that letter, you are under no illusions as to what it is. So I have never had anybody say to me, oh, I wasn't sure what they meant with this letter. No, it's pretty clear what the letter is about.
Okay. And if I'm stand to be corrected, but sorry, Brad, go for it.
No, go ahead.
No, Karen, I stand to be corrected, but you've been audited.
I have, yes, I have.
And what's the first thing that goes through your mind when you receive an email and you open the attachment?
I'm looking for the medical term, but if I use my term, I might be kicked off the panel. Let's just use the word blind panic. Okay. And I think that's important. I really want to stop on that for a minute if we do have time, because even with my level of knowledge when it comes to forensic audits, when I got that letter, I responded in exactly the same way as every single practitioner that I had assisted up until that point. It was actually quite an out-of-body experience, for want of a better term, because I dealt with so many of these practitioners where, you're standing outside of it. So I'm completely objective, and I absorb their panic. And then I allow the panic, and at some point I have to say to them, okay, you need to now stop, okay, because the panic is not helping us. It's not getting us it's not constructive past a certain point. And then when I get my letter, I do exactly the same. And yet I recognize that what I'm doing is not constructive. And at the same time, I can't stop myself from panicking and not being constructive. So it was very good in that sense for me to from there on, never ever judge a practitioner who keeps panicking for a period of time, because it is a natural response to this, especially with the media coverage around it, especially with the horror stories. And there are lots of myths that still float around with regards to audits. And I think one of the main things is just because you panic doesn't mean you're weak. Okay, it's normal. It's normal to panic, and you should actually allow yourself to panic. But there comes a point where the panic becomes counterproductive.
And then what? Brad, what's your rights? What's your rights as a healthcare provider when you receive a letter like this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is a tea or a coffee.
Sure.
And that's your first right. Your first right is to panic, as Corin says. That's your normal physiological response. And we then talk about it as in the 3 steps: stop, think, act. So the first thing to do is, once you've got the letter, you've got it now. It's arrived. There's nothing that you can do to wish it was different or wish it was gone. So stop. Don't bang out a response that says, I hate you, this is wrong, or you're absolutely right, whatever you want. Just stop. And in stopping, phone a friend, because you need somebody to talk you off your own cliff. The worst thing you can do is respond on your own, because you'll know that as your adrenaline raises, your executive functions kind of switch off, and the neurophysiologist and the psychologist will say, there's no frontal cognitive thinking of use when you panic and when your adrenaline is high. So just do nothing. Stop. Then think about it. Phone somebody and say, look, I need to talk. I'm a little panicked. And the guys at Shackleton and Genoa will say, pick up the phone and phone us and let us know. And then you'll reach me or Jackie, because this is what we do, and Corin. So you'll reach one of the 3 of us who will catch this call, and we'll say to you, stop. Just breathe. While you're breathing, think. And Laura's asked a question here, and I'm going to answer her question as part of this. Think, am I naughty in my billing? You are, you aren't, right? Am I compliant in my billing with the guidelines that are related to my profession? You are or you aren't, or you think you are or you aren't. Then the question that Laura asked was, does the funder play a role in authenticating and identifying errors? And the answer is yes, they do. But if you are persistently using the wrong procedure code, or they perceive you to be over-servicing. So I'll give you an example. Somebody comes in and they have trochanteric bursitis, or they have a need for rehabilitation of their hamstring, or they have cervicogenic headaches, or they're having a paranoid schizophrenic state. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a general cluster that says you're going to see that person, let's say 6 times. If you've seen the person 18 times, you're going to be an outlier. Now, there might be a reason that you're an outlier because your practice works in that way. Or there may be a reason because you do a 30-minute consult versus a 60-minute consult, or you work 16 hours a day versus 8 hours a day. That's the think part. And while you're thinking, start saying, where is my information? Where is my coding? Is it all accessible? Don't phone somebody and say, right, I need your help urgently. And then we arrive and we say, okay, where's your billing stuff? And you say, not sure, we haven't done it. And then the act. And the first act is phone your friend. Get your story written down. Reach out to us, because that's what we're here to support you on. And if you're not with us, reach out to somebody who can then look with you objectively, like Corin's taking you through, and say, okay, where are we with this? How do we respond appropriately? And sometimes the appropriate response, as Corin will chat about, is simply acknowledging the letter and saying, I cannot respond to you with your demand of X amount of days. Or it can be, I am willing to meet you on a without prejudice basis with my representation present. There's many ways to do it. So those would be the steps: stop, think, and act. Unfortunately, what happens, what we usually see is people act, and then they come to us and they say, this is what I've done. And you say, we wish you'd done it the other way around.
Yeah, if I can hop in there, that is critical, Lani. That is really, really critical. If there's one thing that I would advise people is that the first steps you take when you are confronted with an audit sets the tone for the entire engagement going forward. If you act impulsively and you put a foot wrong in those first few steps, it makes it very difficult for the people assisting you going forward to retrace some of those steps. And I see there's a lady Rendani here that says that I should remind practitioners to not ignore these letters. Absolutely, absolutely. You cannot ignore this. This is quite important. Rendani, you also say you have the right to remain silent by informing them that you're choosing that right. I'm not sure if I agree with that, because the audit will not go away. You're going to have to engage with this funder in some way. The first thing would be, as you've stopped, thought and acted, like Brad said, would be to possibly just respond and say, you acknowledge the letter. A few years ago, one of the funders' chief execs went on television, and there was lots of questions about blacklisting practitioners and suspension of claims. And one of the things that they were very clear about is that when a funder contacts you and they're trying to engage with you and you refuse to engage with them, then to them, it's an almost automatic admission of guilt. And then they will use the powers at their disposal to almost mitigate the risk to their members. And they will suspend your claims. And they will blacklist you because you're not engaging with them. So I really would never advise to not engage with a funder, but you have to do so in a very structured and very intelligent manner. And this is the crux. You must understand that the funders are well-oiled machines. This is not their first rodeo. They've done this repeatedly. They know exactly what to do. You as a practitioner getting hit with an audit, it's very, very unlikely to have the background and all of the knowledge required to navigate this on your own. So don't just dive in. Don't dive in. Calm down, have your panic, calm down. But even just acknowledging the letter and saying, right, okay, I've received your letter, thank you. And from there, it needs to become a strategy. How are you going to respond? And again, there is no cookie cutter approach. That's something that I can categorically say. People want a tick box. I need to do this and I need to do this. No, it depends on what the audit launched against you contains. And a lot of the time, it might be that you just don't have enough information from the funder. And you are going to go back to the funder and say, I am very happy to cooperate with you in any manner required within my responsibility towards my regulatory body, which is the HPCSA. Remember, you are not held accountable to the medical funder. You are accountable to the HPCSA. Any action of yours still need to fall within your regulatory body's guidelines. And I will get to that in a bit if we have time in terms of clinical notes. But don't ignore the funder. Engage with them, but before you actually engage on the actual audit, you must have as much information as possible to make sure what they want, why they want it, and Brad touched on that. What is your liability in this? Yeah. And I say that that's critical. The physios especially, and I'm sorry, coming back to physios, will say to me, but it's terrible because, Tani Ans from Pofadder brings me cookies every December because I'm such a wonderful physiotherapist. It's not what it is about. An audit is not emotional. And the funder, they don't get emotional. They don't. But the practitioners do. And once you act on emotion, 99.9% of the time, you're going to not get the outcome that you want from this.
Right?
Correct. There's a whole lot of questions coming in, and I think maybe Lani will manage this, but there are some comments that I'd like to make to build on and vigorously agree with what Corinne is saying. Let's understand that we go back to my opening comments. You have a contract with that funder. The contract has terms. You have obligations that you've entered into, which is why you entered into them. You wanted faster payment, or you wanted guaranteed payment, and they wanted a discount for services. So whilst you have the right to not respond immediately, you don't have the right to not respond at all because you have a contract in law. So bear that in mind, number one. Number two, there is a very big difference between your funder authorizing payment for a procedure in the first instance, and then reviewing your billing practices over a period of time and determining off their own system that you may or may not have billed erroneously or overbilled or possibly been wasteful or possibly been negligent or possibly used the wrong codes. They're two separate areas in the organization often. So the fact that your procedures have been authorized and you've always done it this way, and people say, well, I've done it like I've always done it and they've always paid. You say, yeah, but that didn't mean it was right. The fact that they've now checked and you've used, and I'll give you a silly example, but we have it, you've used the diagnosis for a left calf when it was a right calf. Well, that's the wrong code. The fact that it turns out afterwards when they had the right side surgery and they see from the orthopedic surgeon that the surgery was right side, but you've been billing left side for 20 treatments, suggests that you billed incorrectly. Those are different things, right? So separate the two out. One is a reflection on your practice within what the reasonable practitioner with the same or similar training to you has. And that's where these things come in. And the funder has the rights given to them both in your contract and in the act that we've discussed earlier to go back and review. They don't have the rights to unilaterally claw back money from you or stop payments to you or do anything that creates undue harm. Remember, we spoke about this, and for those of you that have already downloaded it, you can see it in that section 19.4 and 19.5. They can't do things that cause undue harm, but you have to be clear to separate, and that's why we were having this conversation. And all of the prep work that we've done, and there's been weeks of prep work, and Corin's done months of prep work on this. The key things to remember is there's a difference between your billing practice that gets approved on a treatment by treatment basis and your billing practice across a period of time, which is or isn't consistent with your peers, because the algorithms are peer-based algorithms that compare us. Now, imagine you look at Lani and Corin and myself. We're all practitioners, but we all look different, we all behave different, and we all live in different houses, which means our practice styles are going to be different, right? But the algorithm doesn't care. The algorithm just looks and says, are you practicing in a normative way? All right.
Thanks, Brad. I think that sort of answers Piet and Nira's questions there. But I want to touch on the society and associations of the different disciplines that's joining us here today. Do they have a role in these audits? Could they go and represent you or go with you to go and see a funder?
Well, I think it's imperative. I think they should, because, you know, we've got our regulatory body, which is the HPCSA, and then obviously we've got our professional bodies, which is, you know, our different professional societies. And, you know, again, I cannot speak for all of the different societies, but most definitely you require your society's assistance if nothing else, to help you evaluate whether or not your billing is actually correct. There's no point you fight an audit if you don't actually know if you've billed correctly or incorrectly. You know, and the majority of the societies that I know of are more than willing to assist their members in this regard. But you have the right, definitely, to contact your society. In fact, I would suggest that you have to do it. I don't think it's a prerequisite. You must contact your society. If nothing else, to find out what the latest information they have on these audits, what is being done with the audits, what are the problems from your profession specific coding or billing.
Sorry, Brad.
Just to build on that, if I may, because there's a couple of questions that are around this. There's the question, and the rights to remain silent piece speaks to one of the questions that were raised. If you drop off your material and you give it to somebody, you're giving them permission to go through it. If you're going to an audit interview by yourself without representation and you're not prepared or you're not skilled or you don't fully understand the scope of these things, you're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage. So sometimes what happens, and it doesn't only happen in these circumstances, it happens where the more experienced person presses the button of the less experienced person. They say, drop off all your things tomorrow and I'll get back to you when I'm done. And you think, like, yeah, and you do it. Well, you've given them permission to go through all your stuff. My answer is no. I will come with these things, or you can come to me. These are privileged, and they contain patient information that you're not privileged to without supervision. So there's ways to do that. The second piece is to say, And it's the question that was asked: how binding is the tariff agreed to by an association to non-members? And the challenge with this is often the representation of a profession is borne out by its representative voluntary associations. So you might choose not to be a member of the association, but the association speaks often for the majority. And if you don't want to be part of the association, you have freedom of association. And so one of the things you recall, I spoke about the Constitution right at the beginning. The Constitution says no rights may be limited, including your freedoms of right to practice your vocation, to your beliefs, your religion, your communication, except when it is. So the Constitution doesn't give you unlimited, unfettered rights. It gives you rights that are limited based on your profession, are limited based on your vocation. And so if in the case that you're a member of a profession where you've elected not to be part of the association, and the association negotiates a tariff with a private funder, different from the state, right? If they're negotiating with a private funder, that's a commercial relationship based off majority. If you were going to ask me a question.
Keep going.
You leaned in, I was getting terrified.
No, Brad, where I'm going is there's quite a few comments here from Hester, from Karen, from Megan saying, I don't have a contract with a funder. I've got a contract with my patients. Karen is pick me.
That one. Please pick me. Yes. Okay. So it's a very, very important question, because this is one of the myths that abound when it comes to forensic audits. What I want to make very clear here, that this opinion that I'm going to give is mine. It's my opinion, and it's only based on the experience that I've had up until now. I'm not here to debate the legality of it. That's for the really smart legal people. But if you think that you are safe from an audit because you do not claim directly from a scheme, you are very, very wrong. You are very wrong. If you create or you render an account and that patient claims from the scheme directly, they pay you and they claim back from the scheme directly. I'm only going to give you the information as to how the funders are viewing this. My view about this is not the point. The funders say that you have a de facto contract with them. So firstly, if you get paid directly by the funder, you didn't need to sign a specific contract in that manner. They see that as the contract already. There's probably some of the fine print when you originally signed up and you got your BHF number and you registered with all of the funders. I have to go check that, actually, it's a good point. But there is, if you get paid directly by the funder, you are contracted to bill their rates. That is how it works. If you are contracted out, meaning that the patient pays you, they then get a statement showing that they've paid you and they claim back from the funder. That does not exempt you from being audited. And I can tell you from the experience, the funders do not come after the patient for the money. They come after you for the money. So the arguments have been made. Legal arguments is, how can the funder claim money back when they haven't even paid you in the first place? So I'm not going to get involved in the legalities of, can the funders do that or can they not do that? The fact of the matter is they are doing it. They are doing it. So do not be under any sort of false sense of security that I'm just not going to send into this funder X or funder Y and therefore I will be okay. That does not absolve you from your responsibility to code within the limits of the structure that your society has set or that you have to code within. I hope that makes sense, Lonnie. I think that answers some of the questions here because I think there is a misperception that you have to actually go and sign a contract with funder X. And if I haven't signed that, then you actually can't speak to me about anything whatsoever.
Mm. So Brad, you've been in this business for quite a few years as a sort of a medical legal expert. What's some of the most common mistakes people make when they receive that letter, first of all? And is it coding errors? Is it double billing? Is it duplicates? Is it using the wrong codes? Is it using the wrong ICD-10 versus procedure code? What do you see?
I see I need to break and have a cup of coffee. I see all sorts of things, and I know Karen would like to answer this from her experience as well. The first thing that we see is that the billing code and the procedure don't always match. So when I started doing this, and let's be fair, I've only been doing this since 1998 in one or another form. Okay, so I'm still learning it. But when we started doing that, we actually had the funders auditing practitioners for the certificates of indisposition, the sick notes that they were issuing. And we found that there were providers who, if you wanted a sick note, you phoned this number, and if you wanted a consultation, you went there. And so they were issuing 200 or 300 consultations a day and billing for them, because they would bill the funder both for the medical certificate as a full consult and for the consult as a full consult. So this is what was born out of this, out of the Medical Schemes Act in 1998. So some of the history of this was grossly irregular billing. And that's what started these claims, because a lot of practitioners, not everyone, but a small percentage enough, saw the opportunity to enrich themselves. They would charge for the face paper and the oil and per needle that they used. And in doing so, ratchet up massive claims. A funder wouldn't have a forensics department if there wasn't a degree of people making erroneous claims. So that's how this began. Then it became a lot more sophisticated, and it became sophisticated as the coding and groupings became more difficult. So now you've got your diagnosis code for whatever it is that you've diagnosed. Now there's a single diagnosis treatment, and then there's a twin treatment pair, and then there's all the modalities that you use. So as the coding became more complex, the bills became bigger, because you could bill on each line, right? So if I get paid 163 Rand a line, and I can find 9 lines, I can charge 163 times 9. And so then the funders would speak to the schemes, and they would agree that you could only do 4 modalities in a regular standard treatment. So then they would cut that off and say, anyone who's done 5 or more is an outlier. And then they'd ask you to explain. And if you could explain because you were doing a specific kind of thing, then they would say, okay, I've got it, I understand. And we saw this with the orthopedic surgeons with polytrauma. And you see this with the obs and gynaes with particularly complicated births, and the pediatricians with hospital visits out of hours. So it's not unique to the cohort of people that are here today. It's a broad-based thing. It's overbilling or incorrect procedures and modalities. We used to find with the obs and gynaes that there was something called a 0005 modifier that was used in surgery that allowed there to be additional fees for the second and third person around the table. So there's so much, Lani, but it all relates to coding.
Lani, if I can add one there, just I know we're running out of time. So one of the things that I've seen that really is probably one of the most dangerous things, probably had its origin in a good space. To make coding easier, some of the software companies were offering, the software has a functionality called almost template coding or baskets. You could create first treatment, and then, instead of you typing in every single code, you create your first treatment template, and then you just press that, and voila, your codes are automatically loaded. Again, I don't think it came from a bad place, but what's happened now is that is something that is quite a big red flag to the funders. If every single time, every patient you see has exactly the same codes, it's the same basket of codes, it's it's almost like we call it template billing. Billing by numbers, that will identify you. It will, and sometimes there's a very simple explanation for it. So, for example, I'm a sports physiotherapist, which means that, and I'm focused very heavily on rehabilitation. That's what my practice is about. So the chances of me using a specific code every single time I see a patient is quite large, because that's what I do. But I also need to be cognizant of the fact that may flag me as an outlier, because not every physio necessarily uses that code for every treatment. And now we come back to why the algorithm it's a numbers game, and sometimes there's a very simple explanation for it. The problem, though, is you must be aware of the fact that it can flag you, and you must be prepared. And if it does, if not all audits end up with people paying back millions. My audit was abandoned. The questions that were asked, in the end, I went through the entire process, the same panic, the whole thing. And in the end, my audit was abandoned because, number one, I was fully informed as to the steps to follow. And secondly, I had my responses in place, and I could prove why I billed in certain ways. And the funder can't unilaterally, like Brad said, just take money when you haven't actually done anything wrong. So, but I think that's very important. People must understand that if you code, And your clinical notes must match your coding. We see that all the time where the member or the practitioners say to me, but I did do the treatment. And I go, I believe you. I really, truly believe you, because I've also had a Friday afternoon where I'm tired and I want to just get home and put my feet up and have a gin and tonic. And then I write crappy notes. The reality of that, though, is the crappy notes will come back to bite you at some point, because if your crappy notes do not support the billing, you cannot then go, yeah, but I did do it. I just didn't write it down.
Brad?
Yeah, Corin's hit on a favorite bugbear of mine. There was a recent case reported in the Supreme Court as of last year, and one of the expert witnesses says, if you didn't write it down, you didn't do it. Okay, so the thing about record keeping is it's not about being able to reconcile your records against your billing. If you didn't keep your records, you're in contravention of Ethical Guideline Booklet 6 and Booklet 9 and Booklet 4 and Booklet 5 and Booklet 1, 2, and 3. You have to keep your records and they have to be thorough. It's a regulatory requirement. And you could see, some of you would have noticed my eyebrows going towards my hairline, and my hairline's already far back. Your records, one of the biggest problems that we have is if your records don't match your coding, your records don't match your treatment. If that patient has an adverse outcome, there's no defense for you in the cold light of the law. So there was a question, a behavioral question. If they insist on your records and you say, well, I want to be there, and they say, well, you can't, and you say, well, you can't have my records. You don't have to be compelled to give your personal, private, and professional information on the guys that no one meets. Because guess what? They get on airplanes. If people get on airplanes, they can get into a boardroom.
Sure.
And I respect COVID as much or as anyone else. It doesn't change the fact that you still have fundamental rights as a practitioner, and that those rights, if you know what they are and you exercise them appropriately and gently, they're there. Don't give your stuff to somebody unless you want them to interpret it in your absence.
Absolutely. And I mean, talking about interpretation, and let's say you do meet up in a boardroom, and this is the last thing that we should be discussing now because we're running out of time and we need to start wrapping up, but is this concept of coaching before you actually go to meet a specific funder or a forensic department. Who do you get the coaching from? How much coaching do you need? Is it a continuous process? Is it a once-off? Brad, Cara, and I'm not sure who's best positioned to answer this.
I'm going to throw that one to Brad.
Okay, and I'll catch it. Where do you ever go anywhere unprepared? So how many years of coaching did you have to do your first case history or your first intervention or your first diagnosis? It takes time. So you don't go into something as important as somebody challenging the efficacy of your coding without knowing your coding system. You hear people say, well, I didn't know that. You say, well, who's doing your coding? No, I write the diagnosis and I give it to my practice administrator. Then my ears go like, no. So yes, coaching is important, and it's not coaching, it's preparation. You must be able to have the information that they're asking for close at hand. I can't tell you what my M versus my S procedure codes are, or my diagnosis codes. I can tell you it's a 04311 and a 04322, but only because I use those every day. So you need to be prepared. This is livelihood, it's money, it's reputation, it's self-esteem. So you take the time to do it properly. And that's why there was a question from an anonymous person, and I'm never fans of anonymous people on open forums like this, because if everyone else can put their names on, so can the anonymous people. But it says, what does a person need to have as experience to do forensic audits? And it's hundreds and hundreds of hours of research and preparation, in addition to living your day, in addition to defending yourself and others, and in addition to working through this journey. The medico-legal profession is built by either medical people or legal people, or medical and legal people who invest their time in understanding the rules and regulations, like what Corin's done here, and like what Lani and the team are doing at Profnet to give us the input and the advice that we have.
Good. Brad, I'm going to have to stop you there. I know you love talking, but I think we can absolutely continue with this conversation for many more hours. And I think, and I believe we should. So I would want to suggest, let's do a follow-up webinar on this topic, and perhaps take it 2 steps, 3 steps further You've received a letter, you've acknowledged it, you've requested for more information. Your support is coming in from your society or the association or from Genoa. Now what? What do you do next? So perhaps Brad, Karen, will you be up for another conversation?
I was thinking as I was listening to Brad, I think that's imperative because to actually now talk, I mean, there's a lot of questions in the chat I saw there about the clinical notes. I can keep you busy for a good 20 minutes purely on the legislation around the clinical notes and explaining to you exactly what you need to do if a funder wants your clinical notes and what your obligations are, what your statutory obligations are. And it's a very, very important aspect, which we will definitely need to cover in a follow-up. And then from there on, obviously, okay, now you're meeting with a funder, what do you do? But the one thing, if I can end with that, I really would like to hit this point home if I can. If in an audit, you are at a disadvantage because you are going up against a funder again, who is a well-oiled machine. I've done many more of these. Do not for 1 second take it lightly. Do not be blasé about the process. And you have to follow a structured process that is led by somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Because the chances of you knowing by default what to do are very slim. I'm sure there are here and there someone. But if you manage a few of these steps incorrectly, then really you are already at a disadvantage when the audit starts. And from there, it just gets worse. So I think panic, but you must get help. You must get help, whether that's from your society, whether that's from an outside service provider, but don't even consider, unless you have significant legal knowledge and knowledge of the process, do not even consider going it alone.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Brad, I'm going to come to you for some closing remarks as well. I just want to share with the attendees some last contact details for Genoa. If you've got any insurer-related questions, Shackleton for broker-related questions. If you want to contact Profnet and EZMed as well, please reach out to us. You know EZMed as a practice management system, which is intelligent. It's got built-in discipline-specific rules and guidelines on the use of your ICD-10 codes, your procedure codes, tariffs and nappies, and it can really help you with your clinical note keeping as well. I'm going to post these contact details in the chat functionality, while maybe Brad, you can just wrap it up with a last sentence and then I'll say goodbye. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I think my last sentence is this. These are, they're in the context of how we practice right now. So let's slow down, be diligent. It's not the scheme hating us or us hating them or a combative environment. It's really a case of, do we understand the process? How do we navigate it well? And how do we avoid the common pitfalls? But as you can see, there's lots in this, lots to read, lots to understand, lots to talk about. Send us your questions, reach out through Profnet, reach out through Shackleton and Genoa, reach out to Karen and myself. We're very happy to help.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Lonnie.
Karen. Thanks a million. It's been brilliant. It's been very insightful. Attendees, thank you for joining us. Apologies for running over by 2 minutes. Please go and listen to this recording again. I just shared the details again in the chat. And keep an eye out for some of our future webinars and communication. But until then, please stay healthy and stay safe. Good night.